My mom's favorite was always clear when I was growing up. My younger sister Rachel 37F and I 42F are the children of my mother Karen 62F. It seemed as though I had vanished from the world the instant Rachel was born. I don't want to come across as theatrical, but this was the reality. My mother was naturally quite protective of Rachel because she was born underweight and ill. I get that it must have been frightening for her to have a sick kid, but Rachel was the only child that Karen truly cared for rather than merely the family's baby. Rachel received royal treatment. Her needs, wants, and moods were always the center of attention. For example, Mom would simply complete any school projects or homework for Rachel, no questions asked. She would allow Rachel to stay home from school if she didn't feel like going. And then there was me. I had clothes, food, and other essentials, so I wasn't completely disregarded, but I was alone emotionally unless it had to do with Rachel. Mom never truly cared about me. She was preoccupied at the spa and forgot about a dentist appointment I had when I was around 10 years old. After hours of waiting outside the school, a family friend saw me and offered to drive me home. My mother pretended it wasn't a huge deal when I returned. "Oh, I thought you'd figure it out," she simply said. The only person who actually saw me was my father, Michael, may he rest in peace. He wasn't home as much as I would have liked because he worked so much, but when he was he tried his best. When Karen and Rachel weren't around, Dad and I would go out for movies or ice cream. He would give me extra cash for birthdays or school outings, but he would urge me not to tell my mother. In retrospect, I believe he was attempting to compensate for how unnoticed I felt. But Dad could not deny the favoritism. Everything was always better for Rachel. I had to save money or work for what I wanted. Rachel, however, only needed to ask and it would materialize. I requested a bike one Christmas, and Rachel made a last-minute request for the same item. Rachel received a brand new gleaming bike beneath the tree on Christmas morning. I received some socks. "You're older," Mom responded when I inquired why. "You can get one for yourself by saving money." However, it was more than just material possessions. Rachel's happiness was Karen's obsession. Mom would move quickly to resolve whatever small problem Rachel was having. I quickly learned not to bother going to her for anything though, as she would tell me to stop being so dramatic or to figure it out like an adult whenever I was upset. Of course, Rachel took it all, and why wouldn't she? She was living the dream since Mom took care of everything for her, so she didn't have to do anything. Rachel eventually stopped learning even the most fundamental life skills. She was incapable of managing her own schedule, cooking, or even cleaning. Rachel was totally reliant on her mother, who protected her from everything. I didn't know how toxic the dynamic was until high school. Mom would complete Rachel's schoolwork after she would sob to her about how difficult her lessons were. Mom pleaded with the principal to have Rachel's grades modified after she failed high school, accusing the teachers of failing to recognize her unique needs. Naturally, it didn't succeed, but it demonstrated the lengths Karen would go to in order to shield Rachel from responsibility of any kind. However, I was supposed to be self-sufficient. I had to work things out on my own. If I had trouble in school, I had to use the money I earned from babysitting if I wanted to participate in extracurricular activities. Karen would tell me, "You are the older sister. You need to set an example." If I ever ventured to voice my displeasure, I was eager to be out of high school. By the time I graduated, I never looked back. After enrolling at a college in a different city, I never made a better choice than to move away. I was able to breathe for the first time. I didn't have to compete for Karen's attention or continually compare myself to Rachel. I could simply be myself. Rachel, meanwhile, remained at home and didn't leave until she was 26 years old and married. Karen continued to be involved in her life even at that point, phoning her 5 times a day to inquire about topics like She even unexpectedly came up to bring Rachel groceries or clean her house, even though Rachel and her husband were more than capable of handling those tasks on their own. For my part, I was going about my life. I obtained a job after graduating from college and began constructing my future. Dad kept in touch with me by giving me frequent phone calls and coming to see me when he could not so much Karen. She would occasionally comment on my Facebook posts or send me a birthday text, but that was about it. I honestly didn't give a damn. Her unrelenting criticism and partiality no longer burdened me, and I was joyful. In hindsight, I believe Karen's fixation on Rachel stemmed from a desire for control. She never allowed Rachel to grow up because she wanted her to always be in need of her. I had to fend for myself after being thrown out of the nest early. Although it was painful at the time, I now consider it a blessing. While Rachel became totally dependent on Karen, I learned to stand on my own 2 feet. The dynamic remained the same even after I left. Karen was Rachel's facilitator. I was the forgotten child, and Rachel was the golden child. Some things never change, which is humorous, not funny. Haha, but funny in a depressing manner. But everything did change 11 years ago. At first, Dad's frequent coughing didn't seem like a huge concern. He blamed it on a recalcitrant cold or allergies. However, he didn't get better as the weeks stretched into months. He actually grew worse, usually exhausted, breathless, and simply not himself. Nevertheless, he continued to work because he was a selfless, industrious man who always put the needs of others before his own. Karen didn't appear to notice at all. She was too preoccupied with her daily schedule of yoga sessions, spa visits, and whatever else occupied her time. After her first marriage ended, Rachel was back at home. By that point, she didn't appear to be really worried about Dad's health. They seemed unwilling to face the inconvenience of admitting that something was amiss. I was trying to keep some distance from all the family dysfunction while establishing my career in a distant place. During our frequent phone conversations, I could sense that something wasn't right. He sounded more worn out and weaker. He dismissed my question about whether he had seen a doctor, claiming to be all right. I knew he wasn't, though. When he eventually went to the hospital following an especially severe coughing spell, things reached a breaking point. A serious lung infection was the diagnosis. When I learned, I immediately dropped everything and ran home. I was appalled when I arrived. Dad was lying in bed by himself, looking so weak and ill. Rachel and Karen were out getting manicures. Karen pretended to be shocked to see me when they returned. She even attempted to give me a hug, but I refused. When I questioned her why she wasn't with Dad, she said that she had errands to run. Both had recently had their nails done and were carrying shopping bags, so it was clear they had just left the spa. I spent as much time as I could with Dad when he was admitted to the hospital. Every now and then Karen would stop by, but only for a few minutes. Rachel said it was too hard for her to see him in that state, and she hardly turned up at all. I was balancing everything at the same time, including communicating with doctors, controlling his medicine, and attempting to make him comfortable. On most nights I even slept in a chair by his bed. It was frustrating that Karen didn't participate. It's not like she was too busy to be there because she didn't work. However, she pretended that going to the hospital was a huge hassle. The day she stated, "He's in good hands with the nurses," will always stick in my memory. Should I just sit there or what? I replied, "Yes, Karen, supporting your husband is exactly what you're meant to do." Dad was released from the hospital after a week. We hired a nurse to assist at home because he still required round-the-clock care. Karen was expected to take charge and assume greater responsibilities, yet she continued to be untrustworthy. She would leave for hours to run errands, only to return with shopping bags, or she would fail to give him his medications on time. On one occasion, she chose to stop at the salon before picking up an oxygen tank for him. I had already made arrangements for someone else to deliver it by the time she arrived home. Rachel wasn't any better. She said she avoided Dad completely because she couldn't bear to see him in such a vulnerable state. She spent much of her time in her room watching television or browsing on her phone. She even went on vacation with her friends during one of Dad's worst bouts, leaving me to manage everything by myself. In the end, I resigned my job to care for Dad full time. To be honest, I didn't want to leave him alone with Karen or Rachel. He was worthy of better. In order to keep him from feeling lonely, I prepared his meals, assisted him with his physical therapy, and made sure he had company. I loved him, so even though it was exhausting, I would do it all over again if I had to. As Dad's health deteriorated, Karen did make an attempt to work harder, but it was too late. She would sit next to him, but she would be glued to her phone, either talking to Rachel or posting on social media. It seemed as though she was unable to fully focus on him. Rachel only arrived after being coerced by Karen, and even then she would excuse herself and depart after a short while. A few months later, Dad died. The nurse, I, and a few of his friends, who had come to bid him farewell, were all around him. Rachel and Karen weren't present. Rachel was out with friends and Karen had gone to some sort of wellness retreat. When it became apparent that Dad was running low on time, I contacted both of them, but they did not answer. The funeral went by quickly. I was tired and heartbroken, but I still had to put up with the drama from Rachel and Karen. As though she hadn't been ignoring all the warning signals for months, Karen talked to her friends about how unexpected Dad's death was. For the majority of the funeral, Rachel made a huge show of crying, but it felt so forced. She hadn't given a damn when it counted. Dad's attorney called me a few weeks after the funeral to discuss his will. I was hoping for a tiny inheritance or a memento, but nothing more. However, I was taken aback when I met with the attorney. Dad had bequeathed the house, his savings, and his assets to me. Rachel and Karen received nothing, given how little his wife and youngest daughter cared for him. I could only imagine how much anguish Dad must have been going through in his last months. He expressed his appreciation for everything I'd done for him by leaving everything to me. It caused a firestorm, though, when Karen and Rachel learned. They were furious. In fact, Rachel yelled at the attorney, stating that she could never be subjected to this treatment by her father. Karen called and insisted that I give them a piece of the inheritance. I declined for the sake of my sanity. I disconnected from Rachel and Karen. Their sense of entitlement was draining. I eventually met my husband after relocating to the city where I was employed and concentrating on starting again. We relocated abroad for his work, got married, and had a family. It's been peaceful, and I continue to let Karen and Rachel be toxic. However, they've made constant attempts to reconnect and even come visit with promises of apologies. But I've cut ties. I'm not interested in rehashing any of this. It's been nearly 6 years since I last spoke to Rachel or Karen. The emotional weight of those years is hard to convey in words. Despite the anger, the hurt, and the deep disappointment, I found peace. The chaos that once engulfed my life was now just a distant memory, and in its place I had built a family and a new sense of belonging. It felt as if I had come full circle, no longer the lost, overlooked child, but someone who had carved out their own path far removed from the toxic bonds of my past. My life with my husband Luke had been a blessing in every sense. We had settled into a rhythm that worked for both of us. Our daughter Emma was now 5 years old, and our son Oliver had just turned 2. Their laughter echoed through our home, filling every corner with joy. I watched them grow with awe and gratitude, knowing I had come so far from that lonely little girl who had felt invisible for most of her childhood. I thought I had escaped the pull of my past. I was doing well in my career, my family was thriving, and I had learned the art of emotional detachment. However, life has a funny way of reintroducing old wounds when you least expect it. The first contact came in the form of an unexpected letter. It was from Karen. I hadn't received anything from her in years, not even a birthday card or a holiday greeting. This letter, though, was different. It was a carefully written, well thought out apology, a plea for reconciliation. I sat down with the envelope in my hands, not knowing how to respond, if at all. The letter began with the usual "I'm sorry for everything," and then went into a series of explanations that felt like excuses. Karen blamed her behavior on stress and difficult circumstances that she had endured, claiming that she had never fully realized how much damage she had done until recently. She mentioned Rachel's struggles and how she had been trying to reconnect with her daughter, hoping to heal old wounds. It was a long, drawn-out letter. Karen even included some photos of the house my childhood home and a small handwritten note that said, "I miss you." In the end, she asked if we could start over and move forward. My heart didn't soften as I read those words. Instead, I felt anger bubbling up again. The years of neglect, the manipulation, the way she had treated me, it all came rushing back. I had worked so hard to distance myself from the hurt. Was I really supposed to open that door again? I had to think about it for a few days. I discussed it with Luke. He had seen how much damage Karen had caused and was fully behind my decision to keep my distance. But there was a part of me, just a small part, that wanted closure. I wanted to see if Karen was truly remorseful, if she had really changed. So I wrote back. I wasn't angry in my response, but I was firm. I thanked her for the apology, but I made it clear that I could never go back to the way things were. I told her that the damage she had done was too great and that I couldn't just pretend it hadn't happened. I also let her know that I had no interest in re-entering a relationship. I didn't expect a response, and true to form, there was none for a long time. But months later, an even more unexpected development occurred. Rachel reached out to me. I had heard little to nothing from her in the years since Dad's death. Her message was short at first, almost tentative, as if she wasn't sure how to approach me. She apologized too, saying that she had finally realized the truth about how badly she had treated me. She expressed regret for how she had taken everything for granted and how she had stayed so far removed from reality while I was there caring for Dad. She acknowledged that I had always been the strong one, and that maybe, just maybe, it was time to repair things. This was the first time in my entire life that Rachel had ever shown any real vulnerability or accountability. But it didn't feel like a genuine apology. It was as if she had read about how to apologize in some self-help book. I didn't know what to make of it. I was torn again. The little girl in me, the one who had spent years longing for her mother's love, felt a flicker of hope. Could Rachel actually change? Could she mean what she said? But then the adult in me, the one who had spent years healing and growing stronger, knew better. Rachel had never had to face the consequences of her actions. She had been shielded from real responsibility for so long that I doubted she even knew what it meant to truly make amends. I replied cautiously. I didn't give her the grand forgiveness she was perhaps expecting. Instead, I told her that I appreciated her reaching out, but I wasn't ready to forgive her. I explained that trust had to be earned and she had a long way to go. I was willing to keep the door slightly open, but it would be on my terms, and she would have to show me through her actions that she had genuinely changed. And then came the shock. A week after my message to Rachel, Karen called. I hadn't spoken to her directly in years, and I could feel the weight of that moment in my chest. Her voice on the other end of the line was shaky, almost fragile. She told me that Rachel had come to her in tears, begging her to fix things between us. It felt like a repeat of the old days where Rachel's wants took precedence over everyone else's needs. Karen seemed genuinely concerned this time, or maybe she was just concerned about how this would affect her own image. She said she just wanted things to be normal again, as if that was ever an option. I listened, but I wasn't moved. Karen's concern wasn't for me. It was for herself and the life she had built with Rachel as the center of it all. I knew this. I heard it in the way she spoke, in the excuses she made. At the end of the conversation, I simply told her that I had moved on. I wasn't interested in reliving the past, and I certainly wasn't going to allow myself to be sucked back into the vortex of their dysfunction. What followed was radio silence. No calls, no letters. It felt final. In a way, I think that was the closure I needed. I had spent so many years trying to fix something that was beyond repair. I had tried to seek love, approval, and validation from people who were never capable of giving it. But I had learned through everything that I was enough just as I was. I didn't need Karen's validation. I didn't need Rachel's approval. I had my own family now, a family that was filled with love, respect, and support. That was what mattered. And yet there was still a small part of me, very deep inside, that missed the idea of what a mother and sister should have been. It was that little girl who wanted to be cherished, seen, and loved. But now that part of me was learning how to let go. As the months passed, the pain of the past began to fade. It didn't define me anymore. I no longer felt the need to look back. I had finally broken free. Life continued to move forward. We celebrated Emma's 6th birthday with a big party, and Luke and I discussed the future of our family. We began talking about possibly moving to a new city, somewhere fresh and full of new opportunities. It felt like a new chapter was waiting for us. For once I felt free, not from guilt, not from the past, but from the weight of what had held me back for so long. And as I watched my children grow, I knew that I would never repeat the mistakes of my past. They would always know love, respect, and the unwavering certainty that they were worthy of being seen and heard. And that was enough, more than enough. Years went by, and the rhythm of life in our little family continued to settle into something beautiful and fulfilling. The decision to move to a new city, one full of opportunity and quiet promise, turned out to be the best one we could have made. The transition wasn't easy. Starting over meant uprooting our lives, finding new jobs, and building new connections, but it was worth it. The old wounds that once felt so fresh and raw slowly healed, and I began to feel like I was finally living the life I had always deserved, free from the shadow of my past. Luke and I found work that we loved, and we built a home that was warm and filled with love. Emma started elementary school and excelled, her inquisitive nature and boundless energy lighting up every room she walked into. Oliver, now 7, had developed a fierce sense of independence, often causing mischief with his little brother's trademark grin plastered across his face. Together they were a pair of happy, mischievous souls, and I felt nothing but joy watching them grow into their own unique personalities. For the first time in my life, there were still moments, though, when memories from the past would come creeping back. When I looked at my children, the thought of my own childhood, how I was neglected, how I was unseen, would flash before me. But it was no longer an ache in my heart. It was more of a distant shadow, something I could acknowledge but no longer be consumed by. I was free. I had broken the chains that bound me to the pain of my past, and now I could stand in the present unshaken. I thought that I was done with Karen and Rachel. That chapter seemed to have closed so definitively when I had set boundaries and chosen to protect myself. But life, as I had learned, is full of unexpected turns. It started with a simple message from Rachel. After years of silence, she reached out again. Her message was brief, but the weight of it hit me hard. "Hey, it's Rachel. I know it's been a long time. I've been thinking about you. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. I know I can never undo what I did, but I've spent the last few years reflecting, and I just wanted you to know that I truly regret how I treated you. I understand if you don't want to reply, but I wanted." I sat there for a long time staring at her words. Part of me wanted to delete the message and move on, to keep my peace. But another part of me, the part that had lived through all the hurt and had built something beautiful from it, knew that this was an opportunity to finally let go once and for all. I thought about Rachel's message for a long time. I didn't owe her anything, but I had already learned that forgiveness wasn't always about the other person, it was about me. It was about choosing to no longer carry the weight of resentment. I had let go of the bitterness long ago, but maybe this was a way to truly release it. So I typed a response. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with the understanding that we had both changed. I wrote, "Rachel, I appreciate your message, and I hear you. The truth is it has taken me a long time to heal from the past, and I'm not sure where we can go from here, but I've learned that forgiveness isn't about what the other person deserves, it's about finding peace within yourself. So I forgive you. I don't know if that means anything to you, but it means something to me." I didn't expect a response, and I didn't need one. This wasn't about seeking anything from her. It was about me, about my journey, about moving forward. I closed the chapter once and for all with a sense of peace that I had never known before. A week later, Karen called. My heart didn't skip a beat. It was strange to hear her voice again after all these years. But this time, there was no anger in me. She apologized too, in her own way. She spoke of regret, of how she had always seen Rachel as the one who needed her attention, her care, and though her words were far from perfect, I could hear the vulnerability in her voice. She didn't ask for anything. She simply wanted me to know that she was sorry. I listened, and I realized something that surprised me. I had nothing left to give her. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. But I also knew that I could never go back to the way things had been. It was too late. I was no longer that girl hungry for approval, desperate for love. I had built my own life. I hear you, Karen, and I appreciate you saying that, but I've moved on, I told her gently. I've built my own life. She said nothing for a long time, but finally she sighed and thanked me. And with that the phone call ended. It was quiet. It was final. That night, as I tucked my children into bed and kissed them good night, I felt something inside me settle, a deep, quiet peace that had been years in the making. I knew that I had healed. I knew that I had let go. I had forgiven them, not for their sake, but for mine. And now I could finally live the life I had always deserved. The next day, I woke up with a sense of clarity and purpose that I hadn't felt in years. I looked at Luke as he got ready for work, and I felt immense gratitude for the family we had built together. I wasn't defined by my past anymore. I had come through it stronger, wiser, and more whole than I had ever been before. And as I sipped my coffee, watching my children play in the backyard, I knew one thing for sure: the past no longer had a hold on me. I had found my own way to be free. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all.